This episode was recorded prior to NVIDIA and Groq's December 2025 agreement. Some references reflect the company structure at the time of filming.
It's better to be inside the bubble than outside the bubble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I read one which I like, which was a bubble is a bull market you're not invested in.
I do think that there's people challenging the notion of, do I need to go to a 4-year college?
Not only does the industry face rapid decline, but what happens to all the taxes, the revenues? How does the country actually generate revenues anymore? Especially if it's like a US company or a different company in a different region.
I do wonder if some of the next biggest companies in the world will come from India and not necessarily come from the US. Because they don't necessarily have the same set of obstacles with these AI-powered products that they would have had in a traditional SaaS-style business that needs a really heavy go-to-market, heavy distribution, heavy kind of VC backing.
I want an agent that I can tell, pay my ex-wife my support, pay my builder for this, and book me a flight from here to here. You know, when you can, if you have enough money, you can upload your consciousness to
it gets more expensive every time.
Yeah, and then you can live there forever in some server. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Accidental VC, where we talk with founders, operators from the venture ecosystem and discuss interesting topics of the day. And today we have 2 amazing guests, both entrepreneurs and operators in the venture ecosystem in Southeast Asia and Australia. Also an old friend and a new friend. Both folks with whom I've either invested into or invested together with. Why don't we start you introducing yourselves maybe and telling us a little bit about how you ended up in the venture ecosystem here in the region. Jono?
Great, thanks for having us. I've been in tech startups for over 10 years now. My first business that was, I guess, did relatively successfully was Airtasker in Australia. 10-year journey effectively from founding to IPOing that on the ASX. But my core is effectively in marketplaces, and effectively now what I've been building is a real estate AI startup, which is using a lot of the latest AI paradigms, LLMs, to find properties to rent and buy, but also to analyze real estate trends like within seconds.
Interesting. And
I remember using Airtasker. I think it's been a minute, but yeah, I remember that one fondly. So my background is software and services. So I've been working in and around tech and data and now what we call AI for my whole career. The more recent journey has been with early stage, growth stage software businesses, and now with Groq.
Before AI was in everybody's mouth.
Yeah, I think when I started doing what we call AI today, it's a broad church, right? I was doing analytics, machine learning. I think when I started, it was operations research. We called it a lot of things, but it was, application of algorithms to data, right? And I think we're still doing that today. It's just gotten more magical. And that business has been on an incredible journey. Maybe we'll talk about it, but now it's really like taking off. We've launched this Groq cloud platform that I think now 2.6 million developers are using. That number is increasing really fast. And we provide really low cost, very fast inference. So all the software builders out there who are building AI powered features, applications, experiences, they need that inference to run somewhere. And so we're one of the solutions for that.
And it's, I hear, faster. And
much faster
and lower cost than sort of the traditional solutions. Full disclosure, right. We're also an investor. Let's talk about it. I know Jono is a user. So you're a user of Groq, Jono?
Yeah, since early days, actually, since they launched the developer program, I think we got on maybe it was like 100,000, 200,000 users, which seems like an eternity, a while away now.
Yeah, I remember you telling me.
Yeah.
Today we have a few interesting topics. So one topic we wanted to cover was to talk about, how as a tech kind of venture ecosystem operator, how life has changed and how, your careers may have changed over the last sort of 3 years since the rise of AI being a kind of major thing. Now we hardly see any startups that are not AI. As an investor, everything is AI. And just 3 years ago, so that was not the case. So, and I can see it affecting, also companies that were founded prior to the kind of this rise of AI, boom, bubble, whatever you want to call it. And they also are now sort of forced to apply AI in one way or another. And I think the industry at large has to think about it. Incumbent large businesses have to think about it. It affects every industry. How do you see it affecting your career sort of over the last 5 to 10 years? Scott, you're talking about you've been in AI. For you, it was AI before everybody called it that.
I worked in services industry for a while, consulting and management consulting, tech consulting, implementing big software technology programs for companies. And I've worked in software businesses. And I think what's really hard today, and I think, Milan, you'll understand this as an investor, is it's really hard to pick winners in the software world. And I think the services industries are now really under threat to some degree. I think it's creating opportunity in some cases, but it's also replacing some of that work. And so, for me, I looked at this changing landscape of software and how it was under assault really from all of this new AI generated software. And now every company had the ability to tack on these new features that would now encroach on, I think, incumbent players and competing players. And I think that's only going to increase. The velocity of that change is only going to increase. So it's a very frothy market. I like to call it like a knife fight sometimes, I think, between these companies, because you just can't, it's really hard to pick the winners. And I talk to a lot of VCs and I say, how do you pick winners out of this? And they all say it's really difficult.
Well, I think even when you think of, let's say, another volatile industry that everyone would refer to would be crypto, right? And it during the last 10 years, it's kind of been the same, which coin is going to be the best, etc., which token. But when you look at who are the winners, the big winners today, after all the dust has settled and it's become much more mature, it's a lot of the exchanges, right? Your Coinbases, your Krakens, Gemini, etc.
Stable coins.
Yeah, right. It's the foundation that is powering these kind of decentralized applications. I think it's going to be very similar with AI, that there will be incredible apps out there that everyone's going to use every day of their life, and there'll be disruptors of those apps within months. And so even those that are succeeding, you don't know whether they're going to be around in like 3-4 years because of the pace of the innovation. But the underlying layer will definitely be there, right? Because consumption is clearly going exponential. And I think also when you think about what amount of the market has actually been activated, it's still quite negligible, if not very nascent, right?
It's tiny.
Yeah, even though we talk about it every day of the week, how many people actually use it every day of the week? Not enough yet, right?
That's true.
Yeah, there's a huge moment, huge wave still coming.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, we invested in all the LLMs and many other businesses, and I've just switched my favorite LLM the other day. How have you found? Maybe Jono, how have you found your experience as a founder? You're a serial founder. You've built some physical businesses. Maybe you want to talk about the pillars as well.
Yeah.
And one of my team members, Chelsea, is a member.
Yeah.
And you've built software businesses, and you also invest in a lot of software startups. And what have you found? Sort of how's your mindset shifted or changed since this all happened? And maybe also the nuances between Southeast Asia and Australia, sort of the markets where we're active in. What have you found?
Yeah, I think for me personally, as a career development opportunity, I am fascinated. I can't get enough of it. I absolutely love it because I would say I'm much more geared towards like a products entrepreneur. I love creating things, solutions to problems. And so I'd say over the 10 plus years building businesses, tech businesses, the challenge has been, as a founder at least, trying to get your idea and your vision into a product and deliver that to a market. There's products in there, there's marketing, but ultimately there's also technology. And these are not really barriers, but you have to get them done in order to obviously serve as a customer. And I think with the rise of AI, each one of those steps is just getting easier and easier and easier within the space of 6-12 months. I think probably this time last year, it was fathomed that the role of developer would be replaced at some point. And obviously very controversial at that point. It was like, well, it's not very good yet, blah, blah, blah. But only 12 months later, you've got your cursors, you've got all these IDEs out there. It's already happened, basically, or happening. So, yeah, I think for me, I love it. I'm just trying to absorb and learn and deliver as much as I can during this period. You don't know how long it's going to last as well. There may be some things that are going to change, whether it's regulation, whether it's some models or AGI and so on. So I think today, just trying to make the most of it. Interestingly, as you mentioned, we've started a new business this year as well, which is a non-tech business, a members club, and that, I think, as a contrast, I'm seeing that it's very, very popular. It's growing very quickly, called The Pillars in Australia, and it's kind of illustrating, though, that whilst there's all this digital evolution happening from business to consumers, there's also this growing kind of physical need where the inundation of AI and technology in our lives just gets so overwhelming as well that, at the end of the day, maybe we just want to sit down and have a coffee with someone, have lunch with someone, right? So
the real world still matters somehow.
Yeah. So it's quite an interesting contrast, I think. But I'm loving it, taking as much as I can.
It's better to be inside the bubble than outside the bubble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For sure.
I read one which I like, which was a bubble is a bull market you're not invested in.
That's right.
Sounds good. How do you think about career paths, especially for younger folk? Obviously on one hand, entrepreneurs who are looking to start companies now, having a whole different set of tools available, but also folks who may want to get their first job out of university. How do you think that's sort of shifted? And what are the things that you're seeing that are quite obvious, or maybe some more nuanced things? I mean, I have young kids. For them, it's still 10 years or so until they have their first job, or maybe 6, 7 if they're fast. And I think about this a lot. I think about actually a lot of what they're learning or what they're gonna learn in high school is probably not going to be all that relevant anymore. And so I wonder. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing to kind of intellectualize upon. What do you see, Scott, in your field of work and the people who work for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of you can kind of find any truth you want depending on the data you look at when you talk about this topic. There's a lot of, I think, people saying that there's young people losing their jobs or unemployment rates are going up, and I think that's you can look at the data and say empirically that's true. I think it's hard to lay all of the blame at the feet of AI. I think there was a lot of overhiring during the ZERP era. I think that there is a certain level of productivity improvements that are happening at companies too. And so I think there's a lot changing. Yeah, a few just anecdotes. I can tell you that I do think that there's people challenging the notion of, do I need to go to a 4-year college? Can I just pick up some tools and go get to work, either as an entrepreneur, starting a business, or working for a company? And even at Groq, I think we've hired a few people straight out of high school who are full-time employees.
Wow.
Who are either doing college part-time or skipping it altogether. I think that's pretty interesting. I think
just very smart folk who
super smart. Yeah. It's you often don't know you're dealing with like a 19-year-old, right? Until you really get to know them. But they can do really impressive things. They're really talented, really smart. But I don't think that's by any way like a wholesale trend in the market. I still think that largely, employment and for young people is still behaving the same way it did 5 years ago. But there's definitely, I think, this threat of like who is AI enabled and who's not. And I think that really will separate out kind of high performers versus kind of mediocre employees in the future. And we certainly look for people we hire, that I hire, that understand AI tools and that can actually, we'd say like they're students of the industry in a way, right? They need to be aware of what's going on around them. And I think that just makes them a lot more productive. So look, I don't think there's any wholesale conclusion you can draw around what AI is going to do to employment at any level. But I do think young people have to equip themselves with different sets of tools, just as they did in prior kind of generations of technology change. And so I think this is just yet another one that they have to navigate, although it's probably one of the biggest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm two things I'm doing is I'm getting my kids to do coding. So I get them to do, out of extracurricular, out of school coding classes. And my oldest is pretty good at it. He can build some pretty cool stuff already. and I put them and allow them to put Perplexity on their iPads, and they're starting to learn. So they're asking questions like, does the world have more grains of sand or more leaves? It's definitely grain of sand, by the way, but like a lot more. but it's interesting because they start to then sort of understand these tools from a very surface level point of view. But I think it's an interesting question. And
I think the concept of education is definitely under threat as well, because obviously for our generations, our concept of learning is sitting in front of a teacher kind of thing, reading books, and eventually searching internet and stuff like that. But yeah, exactly to your point. I think the idea of not only spending 3 or many years of your life doing that, but also paying for the privilege of doing that as well is also could be a foreign concept in the future, with a lot of these tools where it's effectively like one-to-one customized learning from a AI LLM that can explain it to you over and over again until you get it. If that's at the cost of like $20-30 a month, then what is the how do the current paradigms get challenged, or what are their challenges to convince you that no, you should actually pay many thousands of dollars for one course to learn one thing, kind of thing. Right?
For sure.
Yeah. So I think that obviously there are two ways to look at it. Two sides of the coins. How much is it going to hurt? How much is it going to help? I think obviously, provided we use it in the right way, technology, I think there's definitely going to be ways it's going to help that we don't even know yet either, right? Imagine when optic fibers and the internet first got invented and was first getting used, nobody knew that we're going to have streaming services like YouTube and Twitch and Facebook, etc. Right?
Yeah, or that you would do everything from this little brick in your hand, right? In banking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Dating.
I think just building on that for a second, I think there was this common belief that when the internet got widely adopted, it would kind of democratize information. It would kind of create this level playing field. And I think to a large degree, it had positive effects. But I think with AI now, particularly for young people, it's very easy to have a tutor in your pocket to learn and to do more than you probably could ever have done just on the internet alone. And so I think it will create more entrepreneurs. I think it'll create a lot more standout kids that otherwise may not have had discovered some innate ability,
right,
or some innate talent or entrepreneurship. And I think that'll be pretty exciting.
It's kind of a nice way of looking at it. I like that. Yeah, I mean, school is, I feel in a way, if I heard borrowing this from somewhere, it's like, it's like 10-20% learning and 40% babysitting and 30-40% socializing, right? Yeah. There's a lot of other sort of factors to it, but it's interesting to see what's going to happen there. Maybe to switch to to the next topic we wanted to discuss today. What do you think? How this, in the context of how all this is developing now? What are the areas where you're both angel investors? I think I should point out in that context, you've both invested in tech companies, I think, for quite some time, and as SFI. And where do you think the value capture, especially for APAC, will be? And I'll just give a little bit more context and sort of why I think this is a really interesting question. Historically, you have certain businesses like, let's say, Gojek or Grab. They could have only really been built here, right, by folks who understand the local market. And so that Grab bought Uber, right, for these markets, which is very interesting. So there were certain categories, or Lazada is a good example for marketplaces. And so there are these examples that are of localized businesses that really make a lot of sense. Whereas, with AI now you see there's a whole bunch of sort of thoughts I could draw from. I mean, Elon, coming back to the work topic, Elon talks about work becoming optional in the kind of mid to long term, where you just have an abundance of compute and intelligence and robots to do the work. So there's that, but also the concentration of what is happening there in terms of robotics, in terms of infrastructure, and AI, the LLMs themselves. It's really very centralized in Silicon Valley and Shenzhen, right? And maybe a few other corners. And what does that mean for investments? And I think there's I mean, obviously, I think most people who watch this probably know what we do. We run a marketplace for investing in private companies, and we've sort of heavily shifted towards US assets. We still occasionally do Australian companies, European companies. We did Mistral. And, you kind of give the market what the market wants in a sense. But there is a really, really obvious concentration. And I think it reflects also public market portfolios. So if you look at your public market portfolio, what percentage is US? It's probably, most definitely above 70%, many folks above 90%. I think my personal one is above 90%. And so it's not surprising that sort of, filters through to private markets. And I think family offices and sophisticated investors, larger individual investors and institutions also realize this, and there is more and more of this kind of also single asset investment strategies are starting to become a more normal thing. And I think private markets is also something that is, danger of doing some self-marketing here, is also something that's really here to stay, right? That's just become much more normal, and I personally wouldn't be surprised if in 10, 15 years from now, you have a significant percentage, maybe a quarter or a third of the largest companies in the world still being private, because the incentives are just not there to go public. You can get the liquidity from private markets, and you don't have you don't have market sentiment deciding how much you're worth. You don't have the regulatory oversight and the reporting burden to slow you down from innovating. And so there's a lot is changing, right? But again, a lot of this is very, very concentrated in the US, in China to some extent, and to some extent in India and Europe. We talked about a little bit, some of these businesses, that may get proliferated. So software businesses, that might get proliferated because at some point you just tell the LLM, hey, make me a presentation, or hey, do this for me. So are those businesses going to survive that build tools that are essentially wrappers? I think that's one interesting question. But also specifically geographically, like what do you see as the opportunities firstly from an investor's point of view, but also from a founder and industry point of view? What are the areas that you think are relevant to be built locally? And also, how much do you think it's important for investors, from an investor's point of view, to really look at private markets or venture investing to how do you get your money into those hubs overseas? A big loaded question, but
so in a way, is the question, where is the investment opportunities in Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Australia,
or Australia.
APAC, yeah.
Maybe I can start, and Johnny, you can build on this. I've been living in Singapore for almost a decade now. I lived in Australia before that, and then the US before that. And I think the headline criticism people might make is there's not a lot of investable software companies that come out of Southeast Asia. Australia's had quite a few. Like there's been, you have the Atlassians, the Canvas, et cetera, and many others. But Southeast Asia hasn't had many. But Southeast Asia has had a lot of very successful tech businesses.
Marketplaces, right?
Marketplaces, or you might call some copycat businesses. Grab overtook Uber and took over that business, right? And good on they out executed. But you also have gaming companies that have come out of this part of the world as well.
Yeah.
And so I really think you can't make this kind of blanket headline statement. I think you have to go down and look at it category by category. And I think what really excels here in Southeast Asia are things that are hyper local. And these aren't small markets. Indonesia is a massive market. And so I think e-commerce is a good example of that, where like hyper local has been done in a unique cultural way here that's very different than the Amazons of the US. Now, I think if you then apply this thinking to AI and say, okay, what's going to be different about AI in the future? Are there going to be more investable companies coming out of Southeast Asia? I don't know. I think one question is, do you need distribution? Do you need classic software like sales distribution? If you do, I think it's very difficult to build that business and be headquartered here. I think most companies will pivot to North America and then try to expand internationally from there. I think that's a proven tried and true recipe. But I will say something I noticed as an infrastructure provider providing AI to like the next generation of software companies is I look at countries like India, which have enormous developer bases. And I look at what they're building and the lower barriers to entry for what they're doing. And I do wonder if some of the next biggest companies in the world will come from India and not necessarily come from the US, because they don't necessarily have the same set of obstacles with these AI-powered products that they would have had in a traditional SaaS-style business that needs a really heavy go-to-market, heavy distribution, heavy kind of VC backing to fund all that growth. The dynamics, the capital dynamics are different. And so I do think that there's opportunities for new, interesting players to emerge. But from Southeast Asia specifically, I think that's a whole nother set of challenges. But we can double click on it if you want.
Yeah. I see what Jonathan thinks.
Yeah, I think in terms of investments, I think in the past, when you think about investing, one of the most classic lines you'll always hear, because it's relatively true, is it's about the people you're investing into, and execution capability and so on. It doesn't always have to be about how much traction or what kind of tech and so on they have, because some of those things in the past you can kind of get there if the person's good enough. I think now, when you think about it, what is the kind of compass? Where is it pointing in terms of what's the number one thing you want to invest into? Because in the past as well, an idea may not be valued very much, because it's like, well, everyone has ideas, and typically as investors, you see the same ideas over and over again, and then they're not even aware of themselves pitching exactly the same thing or doing exactly the same thing. So the idea now, it's probably still not as important, because a lot of entrepreneurs and teams and so on can have a lot of tools at their disposal to kind of execute on that. But I'm not sure yet in terms of what makes a business very clearly a winner and to invest into. And actually, that's why probably you've seen I have not invested into robotics companies yet, just because I think it's very early. We don't know who's going to be an ultimate winner. I'm sure there's going to be some kind of regulation in the robotics space. Software is always harder to regulate, right? And it's going to proliferate very quickly. But hardware is definitely going to have some barriers of who can be a winner there. So in terms of investing, though, I think obviously really only looking at AI businesses right now, or AI powered businesses, or businesses that are not tech in any way and just very bricks and mortar. I think other things that give businesses advantages that makes it investable would be what kind of moats they would have. I do think that marketplaces are starting to rise again. I think marketplaces had a big rise. The Uber for X or the marketplace for X was a big thing back in the day. And then obviously SaaS I think really took over as the most investable category.
Especially Australia.
Absolutely, yeah. And the marketplace kind of took a bit of a, went away, or not as exciting anymore. But I think where marketplaces are starting to rise now is because they have a lot of first-party data, and they've got distribution as well.
Understanding of the market.
Yeah, and a SaaS business might have a lot of data as well, but how much of that data could they use to benefit others is we're not really sure, right? They could use it to benefit their own customers individually, but marketplaces have a lot of data that can be used in many ways. So I think data is an advantage for businesses today. Obviously regulatory or distribution, if you're a big business already. And there are many, many threats, and everyone's trying to do their own and go after the incumbents. But if you have that existing distribution, that's very powerful today as well. So
the data point thing is really interesting. I think of all the companies I look at in AI that's have an AI bent or lead with AI, if they don't have a unique data asset to reinforce the strength of the product, I think it's very easy to get competed away. And so, or they need to have a unique lead on the data. So like one example in the US, I think that's interesting, is like Harvey, legal AI. And I think they spend a lot of time getting really unique, really deep data assets to power these kind of AI lawyer assistant tools, right? But that's probably very, very US centric. like you could see people trying to copy that in other jurisdictions and probably be moderately successful. But then you're kind of locked into that geographic element. And so then coming back to your question about Southeast Asia, it's like, who has a unique data asset in Southeast Asia that isn't just good here, right? It's because of local language, local regulation, local law, something, right? And so I find that the companies that come out of the US are just much better positioned from data regulatory laws, data access, collection, scale, to be able to build these interesting application experiences. And then they can extend it to other markets, where I think it's much harder to do that from Southeast Asia. And so I think that's one of the examples of a kind of a limiting factor.
Yeah, totally different consumer bases, I suppose.
Totally fragmented. Hard to build scale around data here.
Yeah, you have a lot of data of kind of consumer behavior, movements, purchasing.
Yep.
But also you have a much lower GDP per capita across fragmented markets. I mean, a few thoughts that came to my mind, and maybe we can dig deeper into some of them. Is one is, I came up through the Wellington startup ecosystem when Rod Drury brought the X to work. I don't know if you know the story, when he built Xero. It was in newspapers and for whatever, HR reasons. And I think like Xero is one of those great examples. The accounting software, for those who don't know, Xero with an X. I think their business could have been built anywhere. It just happened to have been built in Wellington, New Zealand. Not even 500,000 people live there. It's very windy. Like if you're a small person, you could be blown over by the wind kind of place. It's a very strange place for such a business to emerge, but it happened, and I think that's kind of cool. And I wonder, one thing about AI is that, you can do so much with so little resource. And that's, I think, unprecedented in terms of sort of software tools. I mean, the same was true for WhatsApp. I think it's the first sort of really great example for this. And there's other businesses. There's many examples actually. You can look this up. But I wonder if that is one thing to think about. Where coming back to the talent question, we also have now, I think, better talent than ever in Southeast Asia. And I've heard some stories about Gojek. At some point, they were struggling. I'm paraphrasing loosely here, a story I heard, but they were struggling to hire engineers because there weren't enough, good engineering grads in Jakarta. And so at some point, they started to build their own engineering school. And they even picked out, if they asked the HR folk, if you see a driver who seems particularly smart, you just see if you can get them into the engineering school, right? And so they would train engineers, and essentially that kind of really grew the ecosystem. And a lot of those folk who came through the Gojek school or university ended up then building other startups in Jakarta and so forth. So I think that talent pool has sort of really broadened in Southeast Asia in general. And now with this tooling of AI, I think that's one interesting factor. That's potentially a positive, right? That allows some people to think about building businesses that are really location independent. What exactly to build? I don't have the answer, but I think that's a benefit, right? That AI enables you to build stuff with smaller teams, and you just at the end of the day, in the beginning, what you need a few really, really smart, really, really hardworking people that are mission driven, that believe in what they're building, and kind of get something sort of off the ground. Then getting it to scale is, I guess, a different story. And one challenge is also that in Southeast Asia, we're talking about robotics. In Southeast Asia, people have maids, right? Most people here have a maid at home who mostly from Philippines or Indonesia, and they help with the household. And it was a topic maybe it doesn't get brought up on too many podcasts, but it's a reality of life here, right? And the cost of this is very affordable. Whereas if you're in London or in New York, it's not so affordable. And in fact, it would cost, I think, by a multiple of 30 or 50 year, it would cost a lot more. So that's why robots make a lot of sense and create a great potential business model. And you see huge amounts of money flowing into humanoid robotics, with Figure AI, Aptronic, and 1X, and these companies. Whereas, in Lombok, where I have an abode and we're building a house, I think it's going to take a long time until people will have humanoid robots at home, because there's just really no strong economic incentive. Yep. And I think that argument sort of perpetuates probably for quite a few efficiencies that you can drive through AI, but it's just not necessary because human labor is still very affordable. So I wonder what does that mean? And are there Are there business models? Is there a different way to have to think about business models in an environment where you have this massive kind of differences in human labor costs, and how will that sort of see the environment develop, and what are the there's clearly some downsides to this, but potentially some upsides as well. So what do you guys think? How does that sort of influence the kind of companies that might get built here?
I think in terms of when you compare, let's say, some countries in Southeast Asia or Asia in general versus some more developed economies, that's probably the defining factor. The fact that these other economies are just quite far down the line in terms of development. So there's things that can get automated, things that aren't necessarily being handled with arbitrage at this point, whether it's labor arbitrage or just even if you're getting something done in Australia, but you're getting it done digitally via Fiverr or some other digital service, right? So I think that's probably where some other countries may not feel the drive of AI yet fully into their lives. But yeah, as you mentioned, it's probably a cost value thing as well, right? If in US the cost of labor is high for certain things, then that's where it does make sense, even commercially, for those businesses to target those industries, right? Because if it only costs $100 a month, for example, in the US to hire someone, a helper, then the businesses that are looking at that sector think, the town's a bit small, there's not a value. Why would I go and raise $1 billion? I can't. It's just not big enough. But obviously, the higher the value that is, then the better the argument, the commercialization of that, right? So I think that those markets will define what businesses will kind of grow, I guess, in those sectors as well. But over time, obviously, it will proliferate into all countries, and that's obviously where you'll see costs start coming down as well dramatically. Humanoid robots in 10 years' time might cost like $50 a month. Today, I think it's like $20,000. Yeah, it's like the Netflix of humanoid robots.
I think it's like $1,000 a month or so is the kind of more near-term realistic. 10-year depreciation.
I can tell you, like in the US, and like everything that I hear out of maybe kind of Western markets, it's always this idea that the TAM is knowledge work, or it's all human labor. Is the TAM for AI, right, and robotics combined together. And it's always kind of the argument is, what am I replacing? I'm replacing humans, and that's kind of the rhetoric you see in the media. But when I talk to companies across Asia, it's rarely about that. And I think part of it's because of the cost dynamics, right? The labor is much cheaper here, and AI is really expensive today.
Yeah.
Really, really expensive.
I think that's a misconception by the public, or by in common knowledge, how expensive it actually is.
The prices are dropping really dramatically, and you can cite all these stats that say, "Oh, it's 100x cheaper," and OpenAI and Google, Microsoft, everyone cites these stats.
I don't know if you're allowed to share, but the call center example that you gave, are you comfortable to share this kind of?
Yeah, so there's a bank. It was actually an Australian bank that told me that to run a fully automated AI call center rep costs more than the human equivalent.
That's interesting, yeah.
Right?
And in Australia,
a couple months ago.
And in Australia, salaries are very high.
Very high.
Right? On a global level.
So when are you going to replace call center reps in Malaysia or Vietnam? Like we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily just the cost factor. I think when I talk to big companies who have tens of thousands of employees in Asia, they're implementing AI, but it's productivity improvements. They're implementing like co-pilots. They're implementing things that are going to help their employees do their job better. Right? And that's really compelling to them. I don't hear the same conversation around, my business case is ripping people out, that you might hear the rhetoric of in the US or elsewhere. So it's a different dynamic here, I think, how people think about AI. And so if you're building something here, like a startup, if you're a startup founder, you probably need to be thinking less about, I'm going to play some kind of cost arbitrage against human labor.
Yeah.
And it has to be much more about, how can I increase the return on that human capital's investment? How can I make them more productive? And I see a lot of services businesses here that are actually growing helping companies implement AI solutions to do that, which I think might be counterintuitive to what a lot of people think is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because I think at the end of the day, you think like the real, some of the biggest companies are built based on solving problems, or others kind of solving a problem that we didn't know we have. Like we need smartphones, or like Steve Jobs, kind of like true kind of revolutionary innovation. But I guess the problem statement is just very, very different here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, if it's about making humans more efficient, does that mean you have a higher concentration of value capture in a smaller set of companies who can just get a lot more done? And maybe that's a part of it here in Southeast Asia. And what are those categories?
Well, I have an interesting thought that I've been thinking about for a while, but it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as well. But when we think about, let's say, developers, again, 2 years ago, no one would think that they could get replaced by things like Codex and Claude, etc. Today, it's not that industry has been replaced. However, that trend is not only accelerating people's development quality, I guess, but also it probably is eroding some jobs on the other side as well. But when I think about actually today, for example, we don't have an AI call center support agent. And even some of the better ones out there right now, they're still pretty mediocre. And most of the time as a consumer, you're like, I just want to speak to a human right now, right? It's just frustrating to get through all the questions. But I think
even humans can be frustrating, I find.
Yeah.
The bar for AI is higher.
Yeah. But I do feel like in 12 months' time, I actually think that we will see the rise of some kind of super agent. And actually, that's probably where it will be localized, maybe in the Philippines or in these traditional call center countries, because they have the expertise, they have the knowledge. So they should be the first ones to drive that. Obviously, when you think about,
because they understand the problem better.
Yes, they've got this IP. Obviously, when you look at, let's say, semiconductors, it's the Valley, right? They're just focused on semiconductors as an industry for decades. But what I think about is what happens after that. So let's say when we do have some hypothetical super support agent company that every website and every Shopify website just turns on for $5 a month, right? It's like now handles 90% of my use cases. What actually happens to the countries and their GDP and the taxes? Because let's say Philippines or even India, which is a lot of business comes from,
like big BPO
centers. Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Back office outsourcing, development, support. Not only does the industry face, rapid decline, but what happens to all the taxes, the revenues? How does the country actually generate revenues anymore? Especially if it's like a US company or a different company in a different region, they actually lose their revenue as well. So I think that's quite interesting. Thing to think about. What do these countries do? Do they start taxing other countries? Do they start trying to tax?
Yeah, I like it. Now we're really getting into economics. Like they have to fix this almost, right? Well, maybe we finish up the chat with talking about what do we really want to be built. I think a lot of the audience here will be founders, entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs or folks working in early to growth stage companies. I'm sure many of them, I know some of my staff have left me to join some of our portfolio companies. It's the best kind of leakage, but it's still leakage. Adriel, it happens. So I think it's interesting to kind of ponder that. I mean, my one, I would like somebody to build a super agent in the sense who can just do all the complex workflows I go through on my phone that take time in a secure way. Like I want an agent that I can tell, pay my ex-wife my support, pay my builder for this, and book me a flight from here to here.
Isn't this the promise of Siri?
Yeah, can it?
I'm still waiting. I do think the app, the phone app OS has like this incredible opportunity to see everything we see, like through that pane of glass. And to integrate all those apps and to be this kind of super agent. But man, I think that's super hard to build. Like all these agentic AI companies that I see getting built,
security or what?
It's security, it's orchestration, it's control. It's really funny because I often think, man, this really feels a lot like prior iterations of software I've seen, like in the last couple decades.
But I would have thought it shouldn't be that hard. I mean, if you stage it, you're a product guy as well. You're both probably quite deep in product thinking, design thinking. I mean, at the end of the day, it should go should be able to go all the way, and at the end send me a notification and say yes, agree. Or I mean,
but that kind of runs
what makes it so
to
difficult?
Like a lot of like classic product experience, like with this opinionated point of view around what a product should look like. Is it all just going to be this like chat interface? I don't believe that at all. I think that any rumors that opinionated UI and opinionated product are dying are greatly exaggerated. Right. Because I think humans, we need, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this software is just a database, right? Underneath it.
It's just a pretty interface is what makes us loyal. But very
opinionated interfaces that help us understand how to think about the world. And Steve Jobs talked about this a lot. You had to start with like the experience and work backwards to the technology. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. But I do think the agents will get better. But I'm very skeptical in the next maybe 2 or 3 years that we'll have these agents that are kind of universal actors in our personal life that are kind of access to everything. Because I think there's just too much surface area for them to manage. Too many edge cases, too many, like, just think payments alone. Now you go farther out, I think we'll solve it. I think it will become ubiquitous, right? But I think it's going to take longer than people think.
Yeah, perhaps.
Which creates opportunity.
I want to build. I would like somebody to build it. What would you like to have built?
I think what's holding it back, and you've seen, I think in the last 12 months, you saw a bit of the rise of MCP, which is a bit of like the first kind of shop protocol at, well, how do you allow an AI to use different tools? I think that was a good attempt, but it's starting to kind of decline in popularity now because there's too much, there's too much information that it needs to consume, and then you have to explain to it what each tool does, and it's just like exploding. So
there's models now for tool selection, for routing. Like it's getting rather complicated under the hood. Right?
It's like 90% of the context window that you've got that you pay for gets used up just telling it like what it can use, and so it doesn't have enough left to decide what it needs to do now. Juice. Yeah. So but I think the good thing is that look, there's a first iteration. There's going to be 3 or 4 iterations in the next 6 months. I think what's holding us back from this kind of super agent effectively that can do everything, one is because we probably just want to make sure that it's doing the right thing. Because you could give AI access to everything right now if you wanted to, like your bank account, whatever. It's probably going to do all the wrong things, right? And so that is that human checks and balances probably what's stopping that from happening today, because it's just the quality. Even if a model is 99% accurate, that 1% compounded over 10 calls, it's going to be like 10% or more. Sorry, errors, and if 1 in 10 people's bank accounts are getting drained, that's not going to be a very successful business, right?
Yeah, you have a very low barrier to error.
Exactly, right. So I think it's those 2 things. One is what can it use, and how do we give it more access or ease of access via the right protocols and so on. And then 2 is once we do that, and we do that very well, we're like, okay, this is it. There's a new kind of like HTTPS protocol that everyone's going to use in the next 20 years. Then how comfortable are we with it doing the 10 things or the 100 things?
And cybersecurity becomes a whole new of paradigm that has to be thought through in this, right?
That's right.
Agents manipulating other agents, and there's all kinds of scenarios to think about. Well, anyway, I'm going to insist on the question: are there any business models that you would like to have solved as a consumer or as a business user?
Just real quick, maybe this is more of a feature than a product itself, but I think one of the things that holds me back from using LLMs more actively in my day-to-day life is the lack of context, the lack of memory. And I know this is getting worked on. There's some interesting companies working on this, but I feel like they don't yet know enough about me, about the world around me that I operate in. And they don't have enough information yet to then be proactive. I think that whole product opinionated experience around how the agent proactively intervenes in my life or makes recommendations, we're like at the most nascent level of. But I think as that gets better, I know I'll personally be using AI a lot more day to day.
Like having an understanding of your contextual life, and so you can say much less and get out what you want out of
I think there's an interesting business here too, because I do think, like we have data portability laws, there will be memory portability laws eventually for AI. And so if I'm an active ChatGPT user for years and years and years, and I use it because it knows me so well, what if I want to switch to Gemini or switch to Groq with a K or wherever, right? How do I do that? There's absolute lock-in. Like that data is not available, and it's highly personal. So I do think there's a whole interesting business around just memory management, memory portability, that will become a very, very topical conversation in 2 or 3 years.
I like it. I think it's a great idea.
I actually have a very specific TV episode of Black Mirror that I remember when I watched it, I loved it because the Black Mirror makes these future concepts just feel really normal in the way they tell the story. And it's an entire history of you, I think, this episode where they had eyes that would record everything you see, and you had like a hard drive in your neck, and everyone had it. And you could play back memories whenever you want, just sitting down. And I think that's effectively something that I would really want in terms of, I think the mainstream, today when we talk about AI, it's, chat typing interfaces, maybe some verbalizing, and there's real kind of just more businessy kind of needs, or some consumer support here and there, maybe help me plan an itinerary, things like that. But ultimately, it would be great if you didn't actually have to type or anything, and if it had that context where everything I see, it's stored and it's got that context, and so it
knows your preference.
Yeah, it's visually, because obviously if you're typing, you can see what you're typing as well. So the LLM could process text but via an image. So I think that there are once those the visual processing of the LLMs gets very powerful, that's I think when mainstream can really adopt it very easy. I think I saw even today Vision Pro now has a ability to apply a skin to your reality.
Yeah.
And it was like, that's great, right? It's starting already. If you just want to make your life seem a bit more beautiful, then just pay $10 a month now. So you can get a great.
It's going to be a lot of tokens.
Yeah. I was almost worried you were going to say the San Junipero episode. It's where when you can, if you have enough money, you can upload your consciousness to
like it's more expensive every time.
Yeah. And then you can live there forever in some server.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining. We're at time. Super interesting episode. I'm sure the viewers will love it, enjoy it, and thank you all for watching. Please like here, there, so that my staff, I have to say this so my staff's not mad at me. And thanks for joining us, and see you at the next episode.